Chapter 1. The Wasteland Encounter. The twin suns of Kalara 9 bore down upon the cracked and barren landscape with unrelenting intensity, scorching the vast wasteland that stretched as far as the eye could see. Dust swirled in lazy eddies, casting a hazy veil over the jagged rocks and rust-colored dunes that had long since been shaped by fierce storms and the brutal passage of time. The air was thin, dry, and flavored faintly with the acrid tang of ancient battles and forgotten machinery, the ghosts of a war that had scarred this forsaken planet centuries ago. In this wasteland, survival was a test of grit and will, and every step forward was a small victory against the merciless elements and unseen threats that lurked beneath the surface. Jace's boots crunched over the cracked, sun-baked earth, the soles worn thin from years of scavenging in hostile environments. His lean frame, hardened by countless days beneath alien suns, moved steadily but cautiously, each step measured against the unforgiving terrain. He wore the typical garb of a fringe scavenger, rugged, dust-caked clothing layered for protection, and a weathered utility belt housing the essential tools of his trade multi-purpose scanners, a compact plasma cutter, a rebreather mask strapped loosely around his neck, and a small, but efficient energy pistol holstered at his hip. Despite the tools and the armor plating stitched into his jacket, Jace was no soldier, but a man who had learned through hardship how to navigate the treacherous border worlds and pick through the ruins left behind by civilizations long fallen. He was alone on this desolate planet, far from the clustered habitats and bustling spaceports of the core worlds, sent by a small-time broker to recover lost tech rumored to be buried somewhere near the old battlefield known as the Crimson Expanse. The stakes were high, for any functioning tech salvaged here could fetch a small fortune, enough to fund months of travel and survival. But Kalara 9 was no place for the faint-hearted. It was a graveyard of metal and bone, where hostile scavengers, predatory creatures, and the restless remains of ancient war machines threatened all who dared to trespass. As Jace pressed onward, the silence of the wasteland was shattered by a faint, irregular sound, a soft groan, carried on the dry, hot wind. He paused, instinct prickling along his spine. His sharp eyes scanned the horizon, catching sight of a flicker of movement near the jagged remains of a derelict starfighter half buried in the sand. Approaching cautiously, he saw a figure struggling beneath a collapsed metallic girder, dust and debris clinging to the figure's delicate frame. As he dropped to his knees and began clearing the rubble, the alien girl revealed herself, slender, fragile, yet undeniably regal despite her battered state. Her skin was a radiant violet hue, shimmering subtly in the harsh sunlight like crushed amethyst, her delicate features marred by scratches and dried blood. Her hair, a cascade of shimmering silver strands, tumbled messily across her face and shoulders. She was unconscious, her shallow breaths betraying the severity of her wounds. Jace's pulse quickened not from fear, but a surge of compassion. Here, in this forsaken place, life itself was rare and precious. He worked swiftly, using his tools and bare hands to free her from the wreckage. The remnants of her armor bore intricate designs and symbols unlike any he had seen, a combination of sleek technology and ornate artistry. He guessed she was a warrior of some kind, though clearly not of his world or any faction he recognized. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on him, for in this place, a wounded alien alone could mean death within hours from exposure, dehydration, or predators. Without waiting, he slung her carefully over his shoulder, the slender weight surprisingly light despite her fragile condition. Jace set off, navigating the hazardous terrain toward what he hoped was a nearby outpost, a small beacon of civilization and safety several miles distant. Every step was agony for the girl, and every breath for Jace was labored under the scorching sun and the burden he bore. His thoughts raced as he trudged onward, unaware that the fragile passenger he carried was no ordinary traveler. She was Alara, the youngest princess of the vengeful Vrixen Empire, a species locked in bitter conflict with the human colonies spreading across the galaxy. If news reached her people that she was alive and rescued by one of their sworn enemies, it could ignite an inferno of war that none of them were prepared for. Yet for Jace, she was simply a human being in need, a a wounded soul carried across a brutal world without knowing the explosive fate tied to her very survival. As the sun dipped below the jagged horizon and the temperature began to plunge, Jace's resolve hardened. He would carry her through the night, through exhaustion and pain, without question, driven by a simple truth: no life deserved to be abandoned, even if it came from the enemy's side. Jace's breath came heavy and uneven as he adjusted the fragile form draped over his shoulder, the faint pulse beneath her collarbone barely registering against the pounding rhythm of his own heart. The desert wind howled relentlessly, whipping grains of sand into his face and turning the world into a swirl of fiery haze. His vision blurred slightly from exhaustion, but he forced himself to keep moving, every step a battle against the burning in his calves and the aching weight of the princess's body. There was no time to waste. Every second in the open was a gamble against predators that roamed beneath the endless dunes, their hunger as fierce as the merciless sun. The alien girl's face, half hidden beneath strands of silver hair, remained peaceful and fragile, an eerie contrast to the ruthless land that surrounded them. Jace couldn't help but notice the intricate markings tattooed along her forearms and neck, patterns that resembled ancient runes or a language long forgotten, glimmering faintly like bioluminescent veins beneath her violet skin. These were not just decorative symbols. They carried weight, significance, a story of a culture he could barely comprehend. His fingers brushed gently against the cool skin near her wrist, as if trying to draw strength from her quiet endurance. Hours passed, the sun arcing slowly across the cloudless sky, baking the landscape until it seemed to ripple like a mirage. Jace's water reserves dwindled rapidly, yet he dared not stop long enough to drink more than a few desperate sips. His priority was the girl. Her shallow breathing betrayed her precarious state, and the wounds on her torso suggested internal injuries that might worsen with every jarring step. He thought briefly of the stories told by travelers about the Vrixen Empire, an aggressive, expansionist race known for their ruthless tactics and cold-blooded politics. To find one of their own in such a vulnerable state, here on a world so far from their core systems, was unexpected and unsettling. As night began to fall, the temperature plunged sharply, the heat replaced by an icy chill that seeped into Jace's bones. The desert's harsh duality became apparent. The blazing heat of the day surrendered to a brutal cold that threatened to freeze the very marrow in his bones. He wrapped his jacket tighter around the girl, pressing his body closer to shield her from the biting wind. The stars emerged overhead, bright and alien, casting long shadows that danced among the rocks. Each constellation was unfamiliar, a cosmic map that reminded Jace of how far he was from home and how much danger they were still in. He spoke softly, more to himself than to the unconscious princess. "Hold on, all right? Just a little farther. There's a settlement ahead. Safe. Water. Medicine." His voice was rough but determined, a promise born from the marrow of his survival instincts, and something deeper, a flicker of compassion that refused to be extinguished even in the cold void of the wasteland. For all he knew, she might be the last of her kind left alive here, and he would not let her die alone. The journey became a blur of pain, determination, and fleeting hope. Jace's muscles screamed in protest, his body on the verge of collapse, but the thought of abandoning the girl was impossible. Somewhere deep inside, beneath layers of hardship and cynicism, a flicker of empathy burned bright. Unbeknownst to him, every agonizing step he took toward salvation was also a step toward a fate that would ripple across the stars, an unknowing act that could alter the fragile balance between humanity and a proud alien empire. In the dark, with the princess pressed close and the weight of her secret still hidden, Jace carried not just a wounded body, but the fragile thread of a future none of them could yet imagine. Chapter 2: The Sanctuary and the Revelation. The night was deep and silent when Jace finally stumbled into the outskirts of a small, isolated settlement perched precariously on the edge of the wasteland's boundary. This outpost, known simply as Haven's Reach, was little more than a scattering of rugged metal huts, patched together with salvaged scrap and surrounded by a fragile barrier of reinforced alloy plates and ancient energy shields that flickered intermittently. The faint hum of generators mingled with the steady buzz of crude neon signs, offering the promise of water, shelter, and safety, luxuries Jace hadn't known he could afford on Kalara 9. For a moment, the harsh wasteland seemed to soften, the ragged edges of the planet's cruelty blurring into the faint warmth of humanity's stubborn persistence. Jace's boots struck the dusty ground unevenly as he pushed toward the makeshift infirmary, a repurposed hangar bay that smelled faintly of antiseptic, machine oil, and recycled air. The flickering lights inside revealed a motley collection of medics and technicians, their faces etched with exhaustion and the scars of their own battles against this brutal frontier. The outpost's medical team was small but skilled, accustomed to treating everything from radiation burns to savage creature attacks. Yet nothing in their experience had prepared them for the arrival of a wounded alien princess, at least, not yet. As Jace gently lowered the unconscious girl onto a cot, a flurry of activity erupted. Hands moved quickly and decisively, examining her injuries, scanning for vital signs, and initiating emergency protocols. Tubes and sensors were attached, sterile fabrics wrapped around wounds that ran jagged across her delicate frame, and a portable life support system began humming softly, bathing the room in a cold blue light. The medics exchanged puzzled glances. The girl's physiology was unlike anything in their databanks, an enigma wrapped in shimmering violet skin and graceful curves that spoke of royalty rather than a mere survivor. Her breathing stabilized, but her eyes remained closed, and the steady rhythm of her pulse was a fragile thread connecting her to this harsh new world. Jace stepped back, wiping the sweat and grime from his brow. He was no doctor, but he knew enough to realize how close she had come to death. As exhaustion finally began to weigh down his limbs, he found himself drawn to the alien girl, compelled by a mix of curiosity, awe, and a rising sense of responsibility. The medics allowed him to remain by her side, recognizing that the bond formed during their journey had become a lifeline for both. Yet no one at Haven's Reach suspected the true significance of their guest, and no one could have predicted the storm of consequences her survival would unleash. Days passed in a blur of recovery and quiet observation. The girl remained unconscious, her body slowly healing under the watchful eyes of the medics and Jace's steadfast presence. He learned her name from a translator device discovered hidden beneath the folds of her tattered armor, Alara Vrixen. The name resonated through the room like a whispered legend. The youngest princess of the Vrixen Empire, a civilization known throughout the galaxy for their fierce pride, advanced technology, and ruthless dominion over dozens of star systems. For decades, humanity and the Vrixen had been locked in a precarious Cold War, with skirmishes erupting in remote sectors and diplomatic efforts teetering on the edge of collapse. To harbor such a figure was not merely a matter of compassion, but an act fraught with political peril. Jace struggled with the implications. He had carried her for 20 miles without knowledge of her identity, guided only by instinct and the raw humanity that compelled him to help a suffering stranger. Now, as he sat beside her cot, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest beneath the synthetic sheets, the weight of his unwitting role pressed down on him like the oppressive desert heat he had left behind. Questions flooded his mind. What would the Vrixen demand in exchange for her safety? Would his own people see this as a betrayal or a chance for peace? And most unsettling of all, what would Alara herself say when she awoke to find herself in the hands of the enemy? When the moment came, it was both sudden and surreal. Alara's eyes fluttered open, their deep, crystalline violet depths reflecting the sterile light of the infirmary with a mixture of confusion, pain, and defiant strength. Her gaze locked with Jace's, sharp and piercing, a spark of recognition and wariness igniting beneath her fragile exterior. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the unspoken tension of two worlds colliding in a single moment. Despite her injuries, there was an unmistakable aura of command in her posture, a regal bearing that transcended language and culture. "Where am I?" she whispered, her voice like the rustle of silk and the echo of distant storms. "You're safe," Jace replied carefully, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. "I found you out there. Brought you here." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion and disbelief warring with the faint glimmers of gratitude. You are human." "I am," Jace confirmed, "and I helped you. That's all I know." Alara's mind raced, fragments of memory flickering through the haze of pain and exhaustion. She recalled the ambush, the desperate fight to escape assassination attempts within her own court, the betrayal that led to her crash landing on this forsaken planet. And now, in this strange sanctuary, she was alive, thanks to a man who should have been her enemy. The revelation was seismic, reshaping her understanding of everything she had believed about humans and their supposed barbarism. Here, in this dimly lit room on the edge of a desert wasteland, a fragile truce was born, forged not by politics or treaties, but by the simple act of one man carrying a wounded girl across 20 miles of hell. As Alara slowly regained strength, the walls of mistrust began to crack. She shared stories of her world, a glittering empire built on centuries of conquest and tradition, where loyalty was currency and betrayal could mean death. Jace told her of his life among the scattered fringes of human civilization, of survival by wit and will in a galaxy that often seemed indifferent to the struggles of the small and the weak. Together, they navigated the fragile bridge between two cultures, each learning to see the other beyond the labels of enemy and ally. But outside the fragile walls of Haven's Reach, the galaxy was watching. News of the missing princess spread like wildfire, and forces both human and Vrixen moved swiftly, their agendas dark and complex. Political intrigue, shadowy assassins, and the threat of renewed war loomed on the horizon. And at the center of it all stood Jace and Alara, two unlikely companions bound by fate and the quiet power of mercy in a universe built on conflict. The journey ahead would test their trust, their courage, and the very definition of what it meant to be an enemy. But for now, as dawn crept over the desert's edge and the first light of a fragile new day kissed the world, they were simply two souls caught in the vastness of space, struggling to survive, to understand, and perhaps, to change the course of history forever. Chapter 3. Shadows over Haven's Reach. The fragile calm that had settled over Haven's Reach was a fragile illusion, like the flickering lights of the outpost's power grid struggling to hold back the encroaching darkness of the wasteland beyond. Days had passed since Alara's awakening, and each moment brought with it a growing storm of unseen consequences. News of the wounded alien princess's survival and presence on a human settlement had begun to leak through the galactic grapevine, traveling at the speed of whispered rumors, encoded transmissions, and veiled threats. Within the glittering halls of the Vrixen Empire, political machinations spun their deadly webs. Among the human factions scattered across the Outer Rim, paranoia and opportunism churned like an undercurrent beneath the surface of uneasy peace. Jace felt it keenly, the shifting tides of suspicion and fear that seeped into every interaction, every glance exchanged in the dim corridors of the outpost. He had never imagined that his simple act of compassion carrying a wounded girl across a barren wasteland would entangle him in the vast, cold game of interstellar power struggles. But here he was, a scavenger thrust into the role of protector, ambassador, and unwitting pawn. The burden weighed heavily, not just on his shoulders but on his heart, as he grappled with the stark realities of allegiance and trust in a galaxy fractured by centuries of conflict. Alara, for her part, was no longer the fragile, silent figure who had drifted unconscious into his care. Each day, as the advanced medical technology of Haven's Reach worked to mend her broken body, her spirit rekindled with fierce determination. She was a princess bound by blood and duty, molded by a culture steeped in honor and survival, yet now forced to confront the complexities of humanity firsthand. The rigid walls of her upbringing, the unforgiving codes of the Vrixen court, began to blur as she witnessed the raw, unvarnished reality of human resilience and vulnerability. Their conversations stretched long into the night, beneath the pale glow of makeshift lanterns and the hum of distant machinery. Words were chosen carefully, her voice carrying the weight of a lifetime of expectation, is laced with the rough honesty of one who had seen too much hardship to believe in fairy tales. She spoke of her homeland, vast star systems ruled by the iron fist of the Vrixen High Council, a society where power was the ultimate currency, and betrayal was a knife always poised at the throat. The ancient wars, the lost siblings, the cruel bargains struck in the shadow of the throne all unfolded like a tapestry, intricate and fraught with peril. Jace listened, absorbing the stories, but also offering glimpses of his own world, a place where survival often meant scrapping for scraps amid the ruins of forgotten colonies, where the bonds between strangers were forged in moments of shared desperation. He described the human spirit, unyielding and unpredictable, shaped by countless worlds and countless battles, yet always striving toward hope and connection. Their worlds seemed galaxies apart, yet in the quiet hours, they found echoes of common humanity. Yet beneath their growing understanding, darker forces stirred. Unbeknownst to them, agents of the Vrixen Empire had already traced Alera's last known coordinates, dispatched a covert strike team tasked with reclaiming the lost princess by any means necessary. These operatives were ghosts in the shadowy web of espionage, a lethal blend of assassins, saboteurs, and spies trained to extinguish threats swiftly and silently. Their arrival on Kalara 9 was a silent harbinger of chaos, signaling that the delicate balance in Haven's Reach was about to shatter. Meanwhile, among the human factions, suspicion bred mistrust. Some saw the princess as a bargaining chip, a tool to leverage peace or gain favor. Others whispered that harboring her could provoke open war, dragging the outpost and its inhabitants into a conflict they were ill-prepared to face. Jace found himself at the nexus of these tensions, navigating alliances that shifted like desert sands, forced to balance the safety of the girl he had carried across 20 miles with the fragile diplomacy of survival. One evening, as the suns dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows over the settlement, the tension broke like a thunderclap. The infirmary's reinforced doors hissed shut behind a group of armed men, their uniforms marked with the insignia of a rival human faction known for ruthless tactics and questionable loyalties. They demanded immediate custody of the princess, citing orders from the Central Command and the need for secure negotiations with the Vrixen Empire. The medics and outpost leaders were caught off guard, their protests drowned by the cold authority in the invaders' voices. Jace stood firm, a silent sentinel beside Alera's cot, his resolve hardened by the memory of the grueling trek that had brought her here. "She stays," he said, his voice low but unwavering, "until we know what's best for her, and for all of us." What followed was a tense standoff, a battle of wills in the cramped, humming room where lives and futures hung in the balance. Words were weapons, and trust was a fragile shield. Alera, despite her injuries, found strength in the solidarity between herself and the man who had saved her life, a bond forged in the crucible of hardship and compassion. Together, they faced the rising storm, unaware that beyond the walls of Haven's Reach, the gears of war and betrayal were turning inexorably toward a reckoning. As the night deepened, whispers of impending invasion and shadowy conspiracies echoed through the corridors. The princess and the scavenger would need every ounce of cunning and courage to survive the coming trials that would test the limits of loyalty, challenge the boundaries of friendship, and force them to confront the true meaning of enemy and ally in a galaxy where nothing was as simple as it seemed. In the vastness of space and the silence of forgotten worlds, the story of a man who carried a wounded alien girl 20 miles without knowing she was an enemy princess was just beginning. The threads of fate were weaving a tapestry of war, hope, and unexpected alliance, a tapestry that would shape the destiny of stars. Chapter 4: The Reckoning and the New Dawn. The first rays of dawn crept across the horizon, casting long, golden fingers of light over the battered settlement of Haven's Reach. The harsh desert landscape, which had seemed so unforgiving only hours before, now glowed with a fragile beauty, a reminder that even in the most desolate places, life could find a way to persist, to fight against the endless void. Yet beneath this gentle light, the shadows of conflict still stretched long and dark, threatening to consume everything in their path. For Jace and Alera, the final chapter of their journey together had arrived, an unpredictable tempest born of years of hatred, misunderstanding, and the slow, painstaking birth of trust between two souls from opposing worlds. The fragile truce forged in the crucible of shared hardship was about to be tested beyond all limits. News of the princess's survival and the outpost's defiance had reached the ears of the Vrixen High Council, and they were not willing to tolerate the embarrassment of a lost heir sheltered by the very enemies they sought to crush. A war fleet, sleek and merciless, cut through the void, bearing the unmistakable insignia of imperial might, poised to reclaim their daughter and make an example of all who dared oppose them. Simultaneously, human warships, wary and divided, scrambled to respond to the growing threat, some eager to seize the opportunity for leverage, others desperate to avoid the conflagration that loomed. The people of Haven's Reach prepared for battle, fortifying their defenses and forging fragile alliances. Jace moved among them like a storm-driven ember, rallying fighters, coordinating strategies, and stealing hearts with the raw honesty of his voice. He was no commander, but his years surviving the frontier had honed instincts as sharp as any general's. The knowledge that the princess he had carried through hell was now not just a symbol, but a beacon of hope added steel to his resolve. Alara, despite her lingering wounds and the heavy burden of her heritage, stood beside him, no longer a fragile survivor, but a fierce leader born from fire and sacrifice. She bore the weight of an empire's legacy on her shoulders, yet her eyes reflected the tempered strength of someone who had glimpsed a different future. The lessons learned in human kindness and resilience had reshaped her, challenging the doctrines that had once defined her entire existence. With quiet dignity, she prepared to face her own people, not as a pawn to be reclaimed, but as a voice of change and unity. The day of reckoning dawned with a sky smeared in ominous hues of red and gray, as warships from both factions converged above Kalara 9 like circling vultures. The settlement's crude defenses shuddered under the initial bombardment, explosions tearing through rock and metal, shrapnel whistling like deadly birds of prey. The battle was brutal and unrelenting, a desperate struggle not only for survival, but for the soul of a galaxy teetering on the edge of chaos. Jace and Alara moved through the smoke and fire, their fates intertwined like the threads of a tapestry woven by the hands of destiny. Alara's voice rang clear as she addressed the gathered forces, calling for an end to bloodshed and a new path forged in understanding rather than conquest. Her words, translated across languages and broadcast through hacked communication arrays, echoed across the battlefield, stirring doubt and hope alike in the hearts of warriors raised to hate. But not all were willing to listen. Loyalists to the old order, fanatics on both sides, saw the fragile truce as weakness, a betrayal of ancient oaths. Assassins and saboteurs slipped through the chaos, seeking to extinguish the fragile flame of peace by any means. In the heart of the storm, Jace faced down enemies who saw him as a traitor, a symbol of humanity's encroaching power. Each fight was a battle not just of weapons, but of wills, as he fought to protect the woman who had changed everything. The turning point came when a massive Vrixen dreadnought, a living fortress of gleaming armor and devastating firepower, descended upon Haven's Reach with lethal intent. Against all odds, Jace and the outpost's engineers orchestrated a daring plan, exploiting the ancient ruins beneath the settlement to channel energy surges that crippled the dreadnought's shields. In a stunning display of courage and ingenuity, the humans and alien allies launched a coordinated counterattack, forcing the Imperial forces into retreat. In the aftermath, as silence settled over the scarred battlefield, the cost of survival was laid bare. Lives lost, homes destroyed, alliances tested. Yet amid the ruins, a new dawn emerged, one where enemies could become partners, where the shared struggle for survival and understanding forged bonds stronger than blood or creed. Alara, standing atop the rubble of what had been a battlefield, vowed to lead her people toward peace, inspired by the humanity she had witnessed firsthand. Jace, once a lone scavenger, found a new purpose as a guardian and bridge between worlds. Their story, the story of a man who carried a wounded alien girl 20 miles without knowing she was an enemy princess, became legend, a beacon of hope in a galaxy scarred by war, but yearning for unity. The desert winds whispered their names across the stars, reminding all who would listen that even in the darkest places, compassion could light the way to a new future. The battle for Haven's Reach stretched beyond mere survival. It was a crucible in which the fate of entire civilizations would be forged, twisted, or shattered. As dawn bled into the sky, the outpost lay scarred but unbroken, the echoes of gunfire and plasma bolts hanging in the air like ghosts refusing to fade. Amid the carnage, Jace moved with practiced urgency, rallying weary defenders and patching breaches with whatever scraps they could muster. The weight of exhaustion pressed against his ribs, but the fire burning within his chest fueled by a fierce determination to protect the alien princess who had become more than a stranger refused to waver. His eyes, bloodshot from sleepless nights and blistering days, caught sight of Alara standing before the battered crowd in the central plaza, her violet skin illuminated by the rising sun like a beacon amidst ruin. Alara's voice, steady and commanding despite the fatigue etched into her slender frame, cut through the murmur of the survivors. "This war has stolen too much from us all," she said, her words carrying the weight of 1,000 battles and the hope of 1,000 futures. "Our people, humans and Vrixen alike, are shackled by hatred born of fear and old grudges. But here, in this moment, we hold the power to break those chains. Let this scarred land be the birthplace of a new alliance, one forged not by conquest, but by mutual respect and the shared will to survive." The crowd was a sea of conflicted faces, some marked by doubt, others by yearning. Soldiers who had wielded weapons against one another now lowered them, caught in the fragile web of Alara's vision. Jace stood by her side, sensing the tremors of change ripple through the crowd, a pulse of possibility amid the devastation. Yet shadows lingered. Old wounds bled beneath the surface, and the threat of violence simmered in the eyes of those unwilling to yield their power or admit the cost of war. Just as the promise of peace began to take root, the sky darkened with the thunderous roar of descending ships. The Vrixen fleet, battered but unyielding, made a final push to reclaim their lost princess and crush the fledgling alliance. Massive warships unleashed torrents of energy, tearing through the sky and raining destruction upon the valley below. Amidst the chaos, Jace and Alara led a desperate defense, weaving through the rubble and rallying fighters to hold the line against overwhelming odds. Inside the command center, the hum of systems and the crackle of communications underscored the tension. Jace coordinated strikes, his voice cutting through static as he directed fire and repositioned forces. The engineers worked feverishly, rerouting power to damaged turrets and shoring up failing shields. Outside, Alara moved with the grace and ferocity of a born leader, inspiring those around her with a calm resolve that belied the turmoil raging within. Despite her injuries, she fought beside her newfound allies, a symbol of hope and defiance in a storm of fire. The battle reached its crescendo when a colossal Vrixen dreadnought, a mountain of gleaming black armor and pulsating weaponry, advanced toward the heart of Haven's Reach. Its sheer size and firepower threatened to obliterate everything in its path, an apocalyptic force against which conventional defenses seemed futile. In that moment, Jace conceived a desperate plan: to use the ancient ruins beneath the outpost, remnants of a forgotten civilization, as a conduit to channel a massive energy surge capable of crippling the dreadnought's shields. With time slipping away, Jace led a daring strike team deep into the subterranean tunnels, their passage lit only by flickering torches and the eerie glow of alien glyphs etched into stone walls. The tunnels echoed with distant explosions and the cries of the wounded above, a haunting soundtrack to their perilous mission. Navigating the labyrinthine corridors, Jace and his team activated long-dormant power relays, risking everything to unleash a surge of raw energy. The earth trembled as the energy coursed through ancient conduits, erupting in a brilliant cascade that struck the dreadnought with devastating precision. The massive warship shuddered, its shields flickering and failing under the assault. Seizing the moment, Alara led a coordinated counterattack, directing human and alien fighters to press the advantage and force the enemy into retreat. The roar of battle gave way to stunned silence as the Vrixen fleet withdrew, nursing their wounded pride and shattered armada. In the quiet aftermath, the survivors gathered among the smoldering ruins, their faces marked by exhaustion and grief, but alight with the fragile glow of victory. Alara, standing tall despite the scars etched into her skin and soul, addressed the assembly once more. This day will be remembered not for the wars we fought, but for the future we chose. Let us build a galaxy where fear no longer dictates our actions, where enemies become allies, and where hope prevails. Jace, beside her, felt the weight of their journey settle like a mantle. The scavenger who had carried a princess across a wasteland, now a guardian of peace. Their bond, born of hardship and forged in fire, was a testament to the power of compassion in a universe too often ruled by fear. Together, they looked toward the horizon, where the twin suns of Kalara 9 rose over a battered but unbroken world, heralding the dawn of a new era.